All around us, people are experiencing various forms of grief all the time. It's not only the death of a loved one, though that usually is the greatest grief of all. But there are these other griefs too. When you move house, or you go through a divorce, or you reach retirement, or you relocate to another city, and as I'm discovering yet again, the simple act of decluttering, just tidying up. Decluttering is a sort of dying as you let go of some things you have held on to from the past and allowing yourself to enter a new kind of way of living in your home. And there's a real sense, I think it's been designed this way, there's a real sense in which every evening of every day is its own kind of death as we go to sleep, and then every morning is a fresh resurrection for us all as we rise again. As the ancient prayer declares, in the midst of life, we are in death. Today's reading is a tender one. Moses has lived quite a life, and it's been a privilege to journey with him over the past months. You'll remember he was rescued from the waters by an Egyptian princess. When he was an infant, he was raised in Pharaoh's palace by his mother as an undercover au pair. He witnessed the cruelty of the Egyptian slave masters and in a fit of rage murdered one of the Egyptians. On the run, he encountered God in a burning bush, and then God called him to free the Hebrew people from 400 years of Egyptian slavery. He battled Pharaoh with the plagues. He led the people out of Egypt through the Red Sea into the wilderness. In the wilderness, they saw manna from heaven and an abundance of quail, pillars of cloud and fire, bitter water turned sweet, water coming out of a rock. And then Moses climbed the mountain to go and meet with God, where he was given the Ten Commandments, and that had to happen twice, whilst he led a complaining, ungrateful people who, in their impatience with God, decided, as we remember last week, to build a golden calf. Moses' last great act of leadership for Israel was to take them to the edge of the promised land. Notably, he got to see it, but he never got to enter it, which for me, if nothing else, is an extraordinary reminder that in life there's no promise, even through our faithfulness, there's no promise that we'll get everything we want. And so it is a little ironic that today we are ending our series in Exodus by reading from Deuteronomy. But let me explain why we're doing that. After Mount Sinai in the book of Exodus, Exodus focuses primarily on the worship of Yahweh. So we read about the building of the tabernacle and the religious rituals which were required for worship for the Israelite people. We learn much about the glory of God and the affirmation of God's now abiding presence with Israel. Maybe one day, when I come back to it, we could do a series on worship from those last chapters. But for now, it feels right that we should end this series. And it gives us a neat ending if we can pause to notice Moses' death as recorded in Deuteronomy. If you have been with us online for a number of years, you might remember some of this content that I went back to, that I shared during COVID about 3 or 4 years ago. If you didn't, then this will be entirely fresh for you. Let me start here from our reading. The eulogy at Moses' funeral was short but powerful. It says, "It never since has there arisen a prophet in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. He was unequaled for all the signs and wonders that the Lord sent him to perform in the land of Egypt against Pharaoh and all his servants and his entire land, and for all the mighty deeds and all the terrifying displays of power that Moses performed in the sight of all Israel." That's quite a life. That's quite a eulogy. It's quite a tribute. Moses was, by all accounts, still quite sprightly in his old age, but after all that he had done, as it comes to all of us, Moses then died. And as he dies, the people mourn him. And what interests us today, the area that we're going to pause on as we reflect on Moses' death, is how the people responded to the death of Moses. Because I suppose for us this is an ending, but I want us to look at our own lives through the life of the Israelite people once more as Moses dies. This will be our guiding verse for the rest of the morning. The Israelites wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. Then the period of mourning for Moses was ended. I think we can learn 3 helpful things out of this passage. Three simple things for us today. Firstly, the importance of tears. Tears. The Israelites wept. I don't know if everyone weeps when they are sad. I think most people do when they are bereaved. But I think there are people who, in great grief, don't shed a tear. They might cry, if you like, dry tears. But here in this story, the Israelites do express their grief with tears. Their tears are the acknowledgement that something significant has been lost, that their life, their world has changed, that something they deeply treasured, a man on whom they deeply depended, is now gone. And the scriptures speak quite often of our tears, which is a lovely thing, and they speak of our tears really as symbols, emblems of a much deeper pain. Verse 31 says, "Have mercy on me, Lord, for I am in distress. Tears blur my eyes, my body and soul are withering away." Such a significant description of deterioration, and tears are the expression. Psalm 39, "Hear my prayer, O Lord. Listen to my cries for help. Don't ignore my tears. Tears here are a cry for help. Notice me, Lord. Let my tears speak to you." And then Psalm 56, where we'll pause for a moment. "You keep track of all my sorrows. You have collected all my tears in your bottle. You have recorded each one. You have recorded each one in your book." And it's that sense that our tears are recorded, kept track of, which interests me today. Because to record a tear means that at some level it is named, or it's at least identified, it is marked. It means God knows the reason for that tear. And it means he has a collected history of our tears if he keeps them in a bottle, if he keeps them in a book. He knows not only our current pain, but God knows all the pain which has shaped us along the way, that has contributed to us being the people we are. The psalmist is really using poetry to say that God knows your pain and my pain intimately, not just generally, not generically, but he knows our pain intimately. And so the first thing I wondered with you today is I wonder if it might be helpful for those of you who are struggling perhaps with a deep grief or one of those other griefs we described. I wonder if it would be helpful just to name your tears. If before the Lord you gave name, you kept a record of your tears. This is why I weep at the moment. I think it can contribute to our healing for our pain if we name our tears, if we give voice to what our pain is. The second thing the Israelites do that for me is significant is they observe a ritual. I love this phrase, "In the plains of Moab they wept for 30 days. 30 days was the ritual. It's in fact still a practice in the Jewish community today. They observe a formal 30-day period of mourning when someone dies. It's called sit-in shiva. And it is, when done properly, a remarkably beautiful honoring of the person who has died. And I think it's such a wise way of beginning the journey of grief, because it exaggerates the depth of what we have lost. I think our modern world wants to sometimes skirt over our grief, and life just suddenly goes on. But sit-in shiva, pausing for 30 days, is a lovely ritual to slow things down and say something huge has happened to me. We know, all of us know, that grief is never neat and tidy. We all grieve differently and for different periods of time, some short, some longer. But deep grief, the constant sense of bereavement, never actually leaves us. It's always just below the surface. I like to use the phrase, "it sleeps in the room next door." My grief over those whom I have loved deeply, that grief is never gone. And so that's not the suggestion in this. These 30 days are for the Israelites a ritual. It's a spiritual discipline, even, if you like. It's a way to say, let's pause and honor the big thing that has happened. And purposeful ritual can be immensely helpful in our sadness, in our pain, in our grief. Because rituals make our grief visible. They say the things that our words can't express, the things that our soul might want to say, but we can't find the language for. I do want to say that I don't think there's any magic to this. Rituals are, to quote Simon and Garfunkel, like a bridge over troubled water. They don't actually cure anything directly, but they hold us for a season. They help us take the next step. And for the Israelites, their ritual was limited to 30 days. And our rituals don't need to be permanent. It can be just for this season, for the difficult period. It can be a bridge over troubled water. I think there's something immensely helpful in giving visible expression to our grief. When I have been deeply bereaved, I like to light a candle. It helps me. I don't know what it is for you, but you might find other things. In our church, we have a garden of remembrance, and over the years, I've seen how incredibly important that wall of remembrance is to people who come to visit it. At a purely clinical level, all the wall actually is a large piece of granite, or several large pieces of granite, with some engravings on it. Yet to the families whose names are on that wall, those engravings speak much more. They speak huge things. It's a sacred place for those families. Our rituals can be very powerful for us, very helpful for us. And so I invite you, if you are in the midst of pain and grief, I wonder what ritual you might perform into which you can invite the Lord to add his healing and his comfort to you. And then the final observation I want to make today about the Israelites' response to the death of Moses is that they exhibit, in fact, great courage. They always, well, I suppose they haven't always, but they've been taught to be courageous over the years. And there's this fantastic phrase in the reading. It really is. It says, and then the morning ended. After 30 days, and then the morning ended. I love the abruptness of the statement. It sounds a bit like a line for me from a Monty Python sketch because it seems so absolutely absurd. Imagine grief just after 30 days going, okay, done, we move on. But that's not actually what the verse is saying. What the verse says is the ritual has ended, not the grief. There indeed does come a time for our mourning to end. Our grief will never end. But the time does come for us to enter again into the new world. It is certainly a world which is not as it used to be. And it may even be a world we don't want anymore because it is without the people or the things that we love. But this is the new world, and we literally cannot change it. And there are some people who never find the way to leave the state. They stay for too long in the season of mourning, or too long wanting to go backwards. But the Israelites understood that if they were to move on in their lives as a nation, if they were to ever enter the promised land, their mourning had to come to an end. They couldn't stay on the mountain forever. They had to move on. Moses was never going to be forgotten in their moving on. It wasn't as if the moving on was some dismissal of him as a person. And we know that he is well remembered because Jesus, the Messiah, would speak of him and hold him up as an example. And the people in a church in a small city at the southern tip of Africa, and those of you joining us online, in the 21st century, all these centuries later, we've spent nearly 5 months talking about the life of Moses. He is not forgotten. But in that moment, there was a life to live. They had to move on. And I think it does. I don't know what other word we would use, but I think it does take great courage to enter the new world after grief. But eventually the time comes to allow the Lord of life fruitfulness from the seed which has fallen into the ground. And so maybe for some of you today, maybe your season of mourning is coming to a close. Some of you may well be deep into it and not ready to move on. But for some, maybe your season of mourning is coming to a close. And maybe even today you can hear God's voice inviting you into a new land. But wherever you are in your life, whatever pains you are quietly bearing, whatever griefs you are quietly carrying, I pray for you the wisdom of the Israelites, these people with whom we have kept company for much of this year. I pray that their wisdom will bless us all by reminding us that our tears are known to God, that they will bless us by reminding us that we should not dismiss our grief, but we should honor it well, And I pray that they will bless us by reminding us that the day comes when we must step into a new land, a land that God has already prepared for us, that He's laid before us, that lies before us, and into which we simply, and maybe not so simply, but a land certainly into which we can and need to step eventually. Thank you for being with us on this long journey through Exodus. It turned out to be much longer than I thought it would be. It's been a great privilege to share with you, and I look forward to whatever the new thing is the Lord puts on our hearts for the weeks and months to come. So God bless you, and God go with you. Amen.